meeting beyond 6.5 hours per Standing Order 4.2, moved by Councillor Mawson, seconded by Councillor Crown. Thank you. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Just to explain how we're going to proceed, we will be considering each of the key consultation topics first, and we have Adele Henderson here to give us a summary before we go into deliberations on each of those. We'll then move and consider the funding requests that have been put forward through submissions, and then we'll open up for other items that have been raised. I've been keeping a bit of a list which we'll work through, and I'm sure others will have items they'd like to add to that as well. So Adele, I'll hand over to you to summarise the key consultation items.
And thank you very much, and through the Mayor and to all the councillors today. Look, this has been a great long-term plan from an officer point of view. We've had 710 submissions through this process, of which you've heard from a number in the last couple of days. So I just wanted to summarise to council and to the community who are listening today where we came to with regards to our key consultation topics. And the reason for key consultation is they are deemed to be significant with the community. So these are where we've had either an increase in our rates as a result of what we're proposing, or that we're looking at something of a new service, which is we're also required to consult with the community around. So just running through the key consultations for this particular long-term plan with council. So the first one was around the timing of the water projects. So 93% came in with wanting to begin those projects now, with 6.9% wanting to start those later. So it was quite a resounding in support of beginning those projects at 93%. The second consultation item was around council's approach to chlorine-free water supply. We had 76 in agreement, with 24% against. The third topic was in relation to our investment in the regional park in Nauru, with 60.5% confirming that they do wish us to invest in the proposal, with 39.5% against. The next consultation matter was around the development of the Tepahinga Ahaki, a community centre for Āhari. There was three options here. One was to start now, one was start a bit later, and the other one was not to do it at all. So we had 30.2% confirming they wished us to start now, 42.6% a bit later. So in favour of supporting the project was 72.8%, and those against were 20.2%. Our next topic was around council's approach to funding a shortfall for the provision of affordable housing. And the options here were to fund the deficit with a loan, to fund through rates, or not at all. So in favour of funding the loan deficit was 86.3%, and funding through rates was 13.7%. And the last consultation matter with council was around an interim operation of the Faraday Centre, pending the decision about its long-term future. And in favour of keeping it open was 80.4%, and those who wished us to close it was 19.6%. There were a number of other matters that were obviously available for the community to feedback on, and those matters have been put forward in the summary report that you got in front of you, but I believe that the council might wish to talk to those in conjunction with some of the feedback they've had in submissions, so I might put that back to the council for further discussion.
Great, thank you very much, Adele. So we'll crack straight into this, and our first recommendation, as per your agenda items, relates to the water supply consultation item. The officer's recommendation, well actually point A is to receive and consider all submissions made on the long-term plan 2021-31 consultation document. So we'll leave that. And I think we will work through these and adopt all at the end, unless there's any particular item that a councillor may like to consider separately. B is adopt the following recommendations which have been subject to public feedback through the long-term plan consultation process. First being water supply, officer's recommendation begin key water supply projects now, including new bore fields, new treatment plants, reservoir replacements, and establishing mini networks. Just open up for debate or any questions that councillors may have. Deputy Mayor Brosnan.
Thank you, Your Worship. One of a few submitters raised concerns around investment in the water projects taking us further away from a potential decision of chlorine-free. So I'd just like to hear from, I suppose, our technical staff whether any of the proposed projects in the 10-year plan, if by investing in these we're deviating away from a decision to be made at a future date around a pathway to chlorine-free.
Thank you. I guess to further elaborate on that question, we are seeking assurance that every dollar we invest ultimately will not be going to waste if the long-term goal is to go chlorine-free. And teasing that out a little bit further for me is also the consideration that the decision around fluoridation may well be taken out of our hands in the near future as well. So perhaps if we could have some comment around the fact that the investment we're making is ultimately going to have to cover off on a temporary, hopefully chlorine-free network, but we also have other considerations to take in.
I'll jump in there through you, Madam Mayor. Firstly, with regard to fluoridation, Napier City Council's never fluoridated its water. However, there is machinations with the central government at the moment to potentially pass that decision making to the district health boards, in which case that decision would not be ours and we may be directed to fluoridate our water. At this point in time, we don't know which way that's going to go. With regard to the question around our investment and water program identified in the long-term plan, whether that would take us further away from being able to go chlorine-free, I'll call on Kath Bailey to elaborate in due course. However, our chlorine-free report identifies that there is a significant amount of work to do to satisfy Te Matua Arawai of our ability to manage risk in a chlorine-free environment. And all of the work that we've identified within our program of work moves us along the pathway to being able to remove chlorine should the decision be made to invest beyond our core program of work. Kath, have you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, the Ministry of Health and Te Matua Arawai made it very clear that going chlorine-free will have quite a high bar, and we're a long way from a position where we could submit a request to be exempted from that process. So there's a lot of work we need to do Saves me shouting at everyone. All right, is that better? Right, so essentially we are not in a position at the moment where we would be able to get an exemption from Te Matua Arawai to go chlorine-free. And we have a lot of work that we need to do to make our network a resilient long-term network. So we've got a lot of different pieces of work that we need to pull together to meet compliance, to make the network more operable, to have more control over where water's going, how much is being used, how we manage leakage. So there's a huge piece of work to really take what was an organically developed network over a long period of time for a smaller town for something that is future-proofed and takes us into the future. So the work that we're looking at won't preclude us from going chlorine-free. It is part of the process of getting to chlorine-free. And as part of the review, we did talk about that to make sure that we didn't put work forward that would be wasted. The overall roadmap is to keep chlorine until we are confident that we can maintain water quality throughout the whole network. And then we would gradually pull the chlorine out of the network and we would monitor so that we know that we're safe. And then in emergency situations, we still need to be able to chlorinate the network. So in chlorine-free networks around the world, they still use chlorine. We'd have to use it for disinfections and pipes when we put pipes in the ground. And you can use it in parts of the network if you have an incident. So there will always be that sort of need to have a backup just in case, and the work that we're doing doesn't preclude chlorine-free in the future.
Thank you, Kath. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Your Worship. Along similar lines of making sure that money that we're spending isn't going down the drain, the sewage water outfall, one of our submitters, I think, eloquently said that we were treating the ocean as our long drop. And I sort of agree that it doesn't sound like a long-term practical approach with climate change, etc., etc. So just looking for some reassurance that the work that we're doing around the outfall won't preclude us from transitioning into some more sustainable solutions in the future, and that money won't be wasted either.
Through you, Madam Mayor. Excuse me. Napier City Council is working on a master plan for our wastewater treatment plant operation in conjunction with capacity considerations around renewal of our outfall and our network requirements. So we are considering alternative disposal methods. It's probably a good time to identify that we do have a resource consent to discharge to the marine environment, and that that imposes conditions upon us in order to be able to meet that. While there might be considerations around climate change and the impacts on the ability to discharge to the ocean, our proposal is to pump that outfall in the future. So sea level rise, I don't think, is a showstopper in that regard, but there is some further work to do in that space. Practically, we also need to consider whether discharge to land is viable, given the nature of Napier's low-lying topography. Our master plan for our overall network does identify at a certain level of development, potentially satellite wastewater treatment plants might be an option to be considered, and at that point, further inland disposal to land might be a consideration. It's probably also worthy of pointing out that the requirements for discharge to freshwater are much more stringent than discharge to marine. So we will work with our consenting authorities to understand what our options are, but there at some point will be a practical application of affordability. So what does that mean? Lots of work to do, a whole lot of water to go under the bridge, so to speak, but those are all things that we need to think about.
Brilliant, thank you.
Councillor Tarpley.
Thank you, through you, Your Worship. Supplementary question, please, John. I'm aware that the current wastewater management plant is still well within its lifetime, but that the precursor to its establishment required some significant engagement with mana whenua. In my short term with council, I've already received comments from mana whenua and iwi around their expectations of discharge into the future, and your comment that we have a resource consent with conditions. Would you do the staff foresee that there's a change coming, that the conditions which allowed us to have that consent in the past may not be there in the future, and that land discharge might become more of an expected outcome as opposed to water discharge? And do you think that your research and consideration of options will address those?
Through you, Madam Mayor, thank you for that question, Councillor Tapani. Certainly at the time of consenting of our current operation, there was consideration for cultural values in that respect. In my time at Napier City Council, I've always spoken about anticipating an increase in consenting requirements or conditions around quality discharge of our effluent, and that should be part of our thinking as we move forward, developing our master plans for renewal of the consent and upgrade of that wastewater treatment plant. We'll need to consider all of those things as we move forward, and there will be some pretty hard decisions to be made in terms of how we might go about meeting any future conditions.
Thank you.
If there's no further questions, I'd like to just suggest a slight change to the wording of this recommendation, in that we insert after begin key water supply projects now, prioritising the work associated with dirty water issues. the work associated with dirty water issues. Keep it simple, Councillor Tony.
Would it be continue, the start of that? Because we're already working through it, the dirty water. Would it be, the start of that sentence, would it be continue?
Continue to prioritise?
Yeah. Because I know the team's working on it currently.
Mm-hmm. We'll pop it up on the screen.
Through you, Your Worship, could I ask a capital program question while that's being worked through? One of our submitters raised concerns around the degree that we had broken down the capital program in the LTP, and I'm kind of in two minds about, and I'd just like a little bit of clarity, I suppose, from staff around our pros and cons. So I'm in two minds around whether we go big or whether we go small in terms of detail and capital line items in the plan, because I'm really conscious of that phenomenon, I suppose, where you assign a certain budget to a certain project, you probably spend hundreds of hours of staff time getting to a point where you tender that project out, it comes back at slightly more than your budget allows, and then that project needs to cease because budget hasn't allowed for it, and then you end up reworking that whole project again at a later stage to try and reduce cost or whatever, and in the meantime you're sort of eating up capacity of staff time. So on one hand, I'm really keen for us to make sure we keep our budgets big enough that we can roll with the ebbs and flows of projects, but also acknowledging that submitters' concern around transparency and council's accountability to specific capital lines.
Through you, Madam Mayor, if I could respond to that. I think that's a really good question, and thank you, Deputy Mayor, for bringing that to the table for conversation. Certainly we have the detail behind our programs of work that form our program numbers under which multiple projects reside. You're absolutely right that at the time that we established these numbers for inclusion in the consultation document for the long-term plan, the confidence levels around those numbers are dependent on how close those projects are to construction, and the natural evolution of estimating cost of projects starts off when we're at concept of plus or minus 50%. If we know we've got a problem or a need in our community for work to be done, but we haven't done any work to really understand the exact nature of that problem, those numbers in the long-term plan are going to reflect that sort of accuracy. As we start to do work on a project and work through problem definition, scoping, potentially what our options are to resolve those, what the concept around that solution might be, and through progressive annual plan processes, we can fine-tune what those numbers are, recognising that when we go to tender, we're still potentially plus or minus 15 to 20%. So there's always going to be some variation in what our funded figures are and what our actual costs are going to be, and ideally would work contingency into those numbers to take up some of that float. But over multiple years, we have multiple opportunities to continue to fine-tune what those numbers are. So we've taken a program-level approach to identifying what the value of that program work is that allows us some flexibility in funding our top priorities within that program, and recognising that we've got multiple years in which to push projects out into and fund at a later date should our actual costs or costs at tender come in higher than what is budgeted for that individual project.
Can I just ask
a
a
very long answer?
question of clarification supplementary to that, through your worship? So in this LTP, through building in that flexibility to fund our top priorities, are you confident that we'll be able to move through those top priorities at, say, a quicker rate than if we were to define budget lines specifically to them, because we remove the risk of one being over budget and therefore stalling?
Through you, Madam Mayor, certainly this approach means that we may not have to formally come back and request more funding or more budget as often as we have done in the past. But there's lots of variables in order to move the project more quickly, and that reporting process is but one part of that. And we are looking at other parts of that to try and speed up our program delivery.
Thank you.
Councillor Tapani.
Through you, Your Worship. So I've got a question on water supply, which might be more on the fringes, but the question is prompted from submissions. So I'll ask the question and leave it to the Mayor and the staff to determine whether or not this is the right forum. We have invested a bit of money in trying to identify a good water source to contribute towards our network. We've dug a couple of bores. As I was reading through the submissions, the thought occurred to me that the water bottling plant on the shore in Awatoto has a direct supply to a stream that runs and distributes out to the coast. My question to our staff was, is that same source of water being considered amongst our options? Or do I have the wrong understanding of their access to a aquifer that feeds out to the ocean?
Through you, Madam Mayor, that is a rather detailed question that we may have to take offline. However, what I would say is that bottling plant has a bore that accesses the Hiratonga Plains aquifer, the same as ours. What depth it is at, I don't have that information at hand immediately, but I'd imagine generically it's the same source as ours. It's the last point at which the aquifer then enters the marine environment, and whether that bore has consented capacity to provide for potable water elsewhere would be a moot point. We potentially could look at quality at that point, but also I think the resilience around sea level rise and potential saltwater intrusion would be a major question for a source that close to the sea.
Thank you.
Councillor Bogue.
I just wondered, Madam Mayor, if it would be appropriate to put something in this particular clause about climate change.
We will be addressing climate change under the other topics later in the deliberations. Thank you. If there's no further deliberations on water supply, I'll move forward to the next officer's recommendation around chlorine-free. Move towards a safe network with chlorine with a view to adding additional steps in the future to move towards a chlorine-free scenario. Councillor Taylor.
I was just a little bit like in the previous, would it be appropriate to remove or replace the word scenario with network?
Yep. No further questions or deliberations? Moving on to the Ahuriri Regional Park. Invest $12.5 million into the development of Ahuriri Regional Park, noting that the development will be pursued in partnership with Hawke's Bay Regional Council, Mana Whenua, and I'd like to make a change here, Mana Whenua and other key stakeholders.
Could I propose some different wording possibly for this section?
You can. Interested in staff's view on the second point, but I'd just like to propose to you a more detailed, I suppose, recommendation in this space. So to invest $12.5 million into the development of the regional park, to vest the lagoon farm land to this future purpose of a regional park, note the existing partnerships with HPRC, Mana Ahuriri and Te Committee Muruwai o Te Whanga. Endorse the next stage of this project to develop and I can send this, so I'm not expecting, this is for discussion, I'm sorry, I'm not expecting anyone to type it as I read. Endorse the next stage of the project to develop a collaborative vision for the master plan for community consultation, and that this be done in partnership.
Acknowledge key partnerships with HBRC, Mana Whenua, DOC, Hawke's Bay Airport and Biodiversity Hawke's Bay, and note there are a significant number of other key parties to be engaged with in the development of the master plan, and support key park outcomes of conservation, biodiversity, habitat, water quality enhancement and stormwater management for discussion.
Well, we might want you to email it through to,
Okay,
yeah, and then we can pop it up here and everyone can read it and we
2
can.
seconds.
Chair, just a suggestion. Just looking at the first, I'm quite happy with the rest of the wording that Deputy Mayor has suggested, but I'm just wondering the first couple of words is predetermined. It says that we're going to invest. I suggest that we use wording along the lines of, and I'm happy to be corrected, reserve or put aside $12.5 million for proposed investment. But I just think that resolution currently is a predetermined statement.
Could I propose, we're making that decision now, it's not predetermined, it's based on the consultation of this, whether or not we invest or perhaps budget is better, budget 12.5
My
million.
point is, part of the work is to determine whether it's feasible for the reserve to occur and for the water treatment to occur on that site. So therefore, we can't say now that we're going to proceed with it until such time as all that precursory work has been completed.
We were consulting on actually endorsing moving forward as opposed to investigating whether we had the ability to move forward, but I would certainly be happy to change that word invest into budget.
Perhaps it would provide some further clarity if we were to note, which we often do with our council resolutions, future gateways for this project, and that of course the final master plan would come through both councils for adoption, approval and project staging, etc. So perhaps we could note something like that in the resolution as well.
We could, yep.
Yeah.
So while we get the amended wording up, I will just open up for any questions of staff that councillors may have. Councillor Brown.
I'm hoping this is an easy one. One of the things that came up was that we were planning to light up West Shore Bridge. I just wondered if that was in one of our plans.
Can I ask? Thanks.
Through the Mayor, I think that was originally in the Ahuriri Master Plan, and I think part of the way to have a look at the Ahuriri Master Plan is that it's kind of like a smorgasbord of options, and you don't have to do every single one, but that was definitely an idea, and at the moment I think we've prioritised other ones such as the regional park ahead of that one.
Thank you.
Councillor Tapney.
Thank you. Through you, Your Worship. We heard a number of commenters speak about the current policing and regulation of users of the estuary in principle, but if this park continues to go ahead, then that traffic will extend beyond into new areas. Is there a current work stream or current thinking around how we can improve resident compliance around such things as dogs and bikes in sensitive areas? Is that our role, or will that come out of some of the relationships with our stakeholders? I'm looking for some direction around how we can get some better outcomes at a practical level.
Through the Mayor, we currently have the Dog Control Bylaw that looks at the areas where dogs can be off lead, and we're looking at putting that under review, or bringing the review forward rather, to have a look at that specific issue.
Supplementary, have you got a time frame on when that might be brought forward for us, Richard?
I think it's seen as a matter of urgency because I think
it's part of also a sort of a safety, looking at the safety in terms of animal control. So I think that should be within the next year.
Thank you.
I'd just like to speak in support of that, and I actually had that noted as another item we could potentially discuss as part of our deliberations, so support that.
Through you, Madam Mayor, can I ask for some further clarification from the Deputy Mayor with respect to the wording, which is not up there now, but about vesting the land, and just trying to understand the reasons why it's saying that that is necessary given that council owns the land. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I was just, and perhaps vest is not the current word, I was just conscious that this is the first decision point that council has made in terms of the future use of this land. We will be discussing, obviously, as part of the district plan, its conservation status zoning, but I was just, and happy to take some staff guidance on how we designate this land into this purpose as part of our deliberations on acknowledging moving forward with the park.
Thank you. We'll just take a moment while you're continuing your deliberations and see if we can come up with some better wording if necessary. Thank you.
Would you be happy to take discussion, speaking to the item? A minute. So, councillors, I'd just like to speak in support of the majority of submitters who supported this project through our consultation. You'll note in reading the submissions with the view of hindsight, and it was the topic of a talking point throughout our consultation item that I prepared, that there was a bit of confusion in the community around investing in a regional park. And I think, like I say, with hindsight, this is a space that the TLAs, so Territory Local Authorities like us, have not stepped into before in terms of investing in regional parks. It's something that the regional councils have worked on historically. But in the proposed wording that I've put up there, it really is around supporting those key park outcomes that we heard from a number of submitters, and essentially those who were not in support of the park, those key outcomes around conservation, biodiversity, water quality improvements. And for me, this is a really exciting project because it signals a bit of a step change, I think, within council in acknowledging our city's impact on Te Whanganui o Oroto, and how important it is that we invest in ecological and biodiversity outcomes in the way that we manage things like our three waters. So I'm really pleased with the support that we received through the submissions. I would like to encourage you to support this project as well. I think there is a huge amount of work to be done, and that's why we acknowledge that the capital funding for this project for us is in year 7 of our LTP, with operational funding to work on the master plan in partnership with the Regional Council specifically as the other key funding partner. I think the Regional Council has put their capital investment in year 4, so essentially at this stage, similarly as what we were talking about with the water projects, we are flagging a significant amount of budget to work towards this project, not yet knowing what the stages of that project will look like, and through the master plan we'll be able to define those better. And I look forward to, if this is successful, going through council, bringing back to you some draft master plan ideas, workshopping with you, with the community, with all our key stakeholders, what that master plan could look like, and seeing in future LTP and annual plans us really break down that budget into achievable project lines. Thank you, Your Worship.
Councillor Tapani.
Just a small question with regards to the amendments. Were we looking to make the list of partnerships comprehensive, or were they merely indicators? I'm conscious of the fact that the Ahuriri Estuary Society they're an active player, and they've been representing that water space for 40 years.
Yes.
And while we don't want to create a 3-page list, I'm cognizant that they've submitted at every annual plan, and I'd love to see them included amongst those key stakeholders.
Through you, Your Worship, I think that's a really good point. And I actually, they were the one that I to and froed with on the list of key partners, because I consider them a key partner as well. I was looking, I suppose, in terms of those key partnerships to acknowledge those, I suppose, professional organisations that may have budget to be engaged in the planning space. But I've also written down, we had the adjoining landowners, we had Waka Ama, Birds New Zealand, Forest and Bird, Blowcart Hawke's Bay, Ahuriri Protection Society, a range of just as important, interested and affected stakeholders, and I didn't want to create a big list, and I thought I was halfway to creating a big list anyway, but I don't want to let any of those parties feel like they're not important in this, but just acknowledging that perhaps there are some key professional organisations maybe that we'll want to partner with, and acknowledge other key parties as well.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I'm happy with that response. We have an active relationship with all of those members, so we work in other spaces.
And just actually to go back to my comment at the start, conscious of course that there may be councillors who support some of the key consultation items and not others, so that option to vote on them all independently is there as well. So if you would prefer that we actually, we can go back and do that with the others that we've already discussed and then move forward. So going back to point A, which was just to receive and consider all submissions made on the long-term plan 2021-31 consultation document. Do I have a mover and a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Mawson and Councillor Simpson. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Moving into B.1, water supply. Begin key water supply projects now, continuing to prioritise the work associated with dirty water issues, including new bore fields, new treatment plants, reservoir replacements and establishing mini networks. Moved by Councillor Simpson, seconded by Councillor Crystal. And please stop me if you would like to speak to any of these as well. But all those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against, carried. Chlorine-free, move towards a safe network with chlorine-free, with chlorine with a view to adding additional steps in the future to move towards a chlorine-free network. I'm happy to move from the chair, seconded by Councillor Brown. All those in favour, please say aye.
Could I just say something? To move towards a chlorine-free network, does that define that we're definitely going to do that, or does it just say if it's possible?
With a view to adding additional steps in the future. It's not committing to it 100%.
Should it be possible? Because one wonders if it's going to be actually possible to do that.
Are you suggesting some amended wording in there, Councillor Bogue?
Potentially adding
additional steps towards where possible or if possible.
It could be in consultation with the community and meeting the requirements of Taumata Arawai for exemption.
That would be better.
Through you, Madam Mayor, that's what I was going to suggest, is before the chlorine, sort of looking at the mandate that we actually have, because at the moment it looks like we're making the chlorine go in there when the reality is it's mandated to go in.
I'm happy with that rewording as the mover. Happy as the seconder?
Second.
Thank you for that, Councillor Bogan Mawson. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. And on to our Ahuriri Regional Park. Are we still waiting on some wording around the rest of the lagoon?
Through you, Madam Mayor, we are, I believe their officers are considering if the second bullet point is unnecessarily restrictive, given that there is still a bit of work to do to understand if all of the lagoon farmland is required. But I'll just see if we've got an update. If not, we might need to ask for a short. Adele says 1 minute. Could be like a basketball minute, unfortunately. But happy to take any discussions on that second bullet point while they're working through something that speaks to the intent of the Deputy Mayor but allows for district plan review and other things to take place.
My question would be the need to have that second bullet point in there.
Could we potentially just have budget $12.5 million into the development of the regional park on
Located
on the
Lagoon Farm?
I believe that we may have come up with a solution before the officers have. But yes, certainly I would find that that allows for the intent with a little more flexibility. Thank you.
Come back to this one.
Yep. Okay, so we will just park that for the moment and move on to Te Pihinga. The recommendation before us is to develop a detailed design, explore options for the operating model, confirm partnerships and other funding sources, and develop a social procurement plan in time to begin construction of Te Pihinga in 2023, noting the cost of $11.5 million. I just have a question, please, of council officers as to where things are at with the acquisition of the land for the Te Pihinga project.
Through the Mayor, just to update everybody, as you're aware, the Council resolved to purchase the land from Kāinga Ora in July last year, and that process is nearing its finalisation. We've had some input from our legal advice and have made recommendations back to Kāinga Ora and understand that they are being accommodated and that we should have a finalised sales and purchase agreement any time, imminently.
So further to that, and depending on if there's someone here who can answer the question, do we need to just safeguard ourselves in this resolution should for some unforeseen reason the purchase of the land not actually come through to fruition? Don't have a lawyer present, I appreciate.
Through the Mayor, advice from property manager is that the risk of that is extremely low at this point.
Okay.
But it's always a possibility.
So perhaps we could just add the words subject to final acquisition of land. Councillor Wright?
Yes, I just have a question because I was on the council when we were originally developing the Pokimoki Marae, and when this concept came up, I was kind of thinking that back to that time when we were developing that project, and I felt that there were a lot of parallels between the two. So it was very interesting for me to have that confirmed with Tawana Aranui's submission, the chairperson of the Pokimoki Marae, when he pointed out to the words that were spoken during the developmental phase of the marae, which was that we were to build a marae complex with supporting facilities within the Maraenui district that provides essential services to Māori and the wider community. And I was wondering, has something changed about the intent of this original kōrero, and if so, how has that changed and why? Because if the marae didn't achieve its original purpose or potential, should we be now looking at a new project before that original purpose and potential has been achieved on that site?
Councillor Tapani.
So I've got a supplementary question to Councillor Wright's. I noticed in our paperwork we were talking about a spatial plan for the CBD. Would there be value in defining a spatial plan for, or whether you can call it a community plan or not? It's all part about linking with those community groups and networks and providing them with the ability to participate, but also identifying what services, what facilities, what we have within that space, and wondering whether or not we could gain some value by undertaking that process and better understanding how we could get, one, identify the outcomes of the relationship with Pukemuke Marae, and two, whether or not an extension of facilities would grow that or be a duplication of that.
Yes, just to add to that, given that the sports club believes that they have a role to play in this space as well.
I had made a note generally about community plans for us to discuss in other items. However, I think it is very valid to raise that now specifically in relation to Marae Nui and also to the Te Pihinga project. So we could certainly, I think, include in here around this recommendation that this assessment, this further development would need to encompass a community plan and the other community facilities that are already available and what the role of each of these would be within the local community.
Yes, I would support that, because I believe we do need to have the conversation with the marae about if they're not achieving those original outcomes that we wanted for it, why they aren't, and how we can support them to do that.
Councillor McGrath, while I try and think of some words, unless you're going to provide me with them.
No, but I'll fill some time in. I find it difficult when we're talking about community plans and what we could be running and what programs we've got go to detailed design. I would have thought that would come way down the end once you worked out what you could use the facility for, and then you would design the facility around that, not necessarily the other way around. And depending on the outcome, if the programs we're going to have can fit within the marae or the sports club, we may not need a design at all. So I think we've got a little bit of cart before the horse. We've also heard from some of our key stakeholders in the area that they haven't been consulted, and I'd hate to think we were going to go to detailed design without having all the input that's required.
Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think we're all on a similar plane, and I hadn't sort of got too detailed in what I was going to suggest, but I've come up with a very quick that we could just put at the start of that sentence, to engage in an extensive consultation process with all stakeholders prior to embarking on detailed design options for the operating, funding and social procurement plan, because it became very evident from many of our submitters that Mana Whenua, Pukemuke Marae, all of these organisations felt or actually spoke against the project because they hadn't been consulted. So if we embark on that process first, before we move into the next stage, then perhaps the time frame of 2023 is still achievable. So I think if we start that engagement now, then we still may be able to look at the 2023 start of the actual project.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Councillor Mawson.
I don't disagree with that, but to be fair, I think the wording, it's all in the wording, isn't it? Basically, the delivery that says that we haven't actually engaged in a decent consultation. I feel that potentially to put, with respect to staff who've done some major work on this, I do feel that it should say something about an additional
I agree, Councillor
consultation
Mawson,
process.
because there has been a significant amount of consultation undertaken, recognising that perhaps some of our stakeholders have felt that it was insufficient to meet their needs. So if we word it in a way that it's additional consultation with all key stakeholders.
I have absolutely no difficulty with that. I know there's been considerable consultation, but as in many of our deliberations, it just seems to be we don't get that message across.
Yep. Councillor McGrath.
Just another question. Is it possible at some stage to get some information from the officers on whether these sorts of facilities are elsewhere around the country and whether they're working or not working or what size they are? Is it possible to get that sort of information?
I'm sure that that is very possible, and we could include in our resolution here that we're wanting to seek information on similar facilities around the country to use in the development of our modelling.
Just through the chair, just to respond to that, there is a feasibility study being finalised at this stage, and we can make sure that we include a section on things that are operating around the country within that feasibility study.
Great, thank you.
What did you put up, Graham?
Second red portion,
Yeah.
to engage in additional extensive consultation prior to embarking on.
Question,
Project.
what if that consultation shows that it shouldn't go? It's saying that you're going to go ahead with it, but what if it says you shouldn't put it there, you should use what facilities are there?
What if?
Councillor Simpson, you've been waiting patiently there.
Well, I've been watching this evolve, but I do want to recognise the work that staff have done up till this point. It's an intriguing proposal for scale and cost, but I think we also have to recognise out of the 570 submitters who submitted in their form, their online form, 178 actually provided detailed explanation of what they thought. And some of that actually is more enlightening than their initial mark. Do they want it or don't they want it? And some of the commentary, clearly, and including some of the commentary we received through submitters that presented to us over the last 2 days, is there appears to be an element of confusion as to what the centre is to provide. You know, we've had childcare centres, we've had cultural centres, we've had education, we've had sleepover. There appears to be some considerable confusion over what the centre is aiming to achieve in the community. And perhaps it's even an opportunity for us to go right back to the beginning and say, well, what is it that we're trying to fix? And is there another way?
Councillor Wright, then Councillor Bogue.
I just want clarification that the development of a community plan, is that that will include an audit of the current facilities that are available there and what services they're providing, or could potentially provide? That's what I want clarification on.
Yeah.
Through the Mayor, that will be included in the feasibility study for the centre. And through the Chair, just to add to that, defining what a community plan might be useful. If it's in relation to the centre, then we have some guidelines about how we can achieve that. But a wider community plan will involve a whole range of issues and topics and solutions potentially.
So I don't think that this really is the appropriate place to be discussing a full community plan. So, sorry, if we could actually remove that first bullet point out, and make reference to the fact that the feasibility study will include the detail around existing community facilities.
No.
Yeah,
No,
I mean,
it's
just
sufficient.
to further
Yeah,
explain,
yeah.
my concern is around the current facilities we have and their underutilisation. So as long as that forms part of this, then I will support it.
So the feasibility study will include a review of the utilisation of the existing community facilities. A review of the utilisation of existing community facilities. Do you want some further wording around that, Councillor Wright? I know it's not quite hitting what you want it to say.
Existing community facilities and the services that they... Yeah, could. They could provide, yeah.
They could,
Yeah.
they
because
currently,
They currently and could they provide, because,
yeah.
what we're talking about is that there's probably space there that's not being utilised.
Yep.
If it is being utilised, that's fine, we just need to investigate it.
Yeah.
Shouldn't that be first as well?
Yeah. Yeah.
Bullet point first.
Councillor Bogue, I heard, and then Councillor Mawson, I see that you were.
So I think we've got sidetracked. We went out and asked what people thought about Te Pihinga, and this surely is what we are looking at. And the issue that I felt that I wanted to add to it was the original statement, but to develop the detailed design in partnership with community stakeholders, rather than going down this track of, well, what's happening at the marae, what's happening at the Marae Nui Rugby and Sports Association. I just see quite clearly they're not in competition, that they complement each other. So giving a whole lot more work to our staff to go and find out what those organisations do before we proceed, I think is unnecessary. So my suggestion was, just taking that first sentence, to develop a detailed design in partnership with community stakeholders, because that was the issue. They hadn't been involved and they wanted to be involved. Then explore options for the operating model. So sorry, but I just don't think it's necessary to get into all this other detail about the marae and the sports club. Just involve them in the detailed design.
And I think just to sort of reiterate what Councillor Wright has said, we did hear from a number of submitters that they felt that the existing facilities were actually there to provide some of the activities that had been suggested would come from Te Pihinga. So I think it's really doing a bit of a stock take to just satisfy ourselves before we're making an investment of $11.5 million that we're not investing in a facility that those activities could be undertaken and delivered from existing community facilities.
Thank you for that summation.
Councillor Mawson, you've been waiting patiently.
No, that's okay, thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor, I'm just looking at chicken and egg scenario here, and it was actually mentioned by Councillor Wright, but I think it's been missed. And that was, if we're looking at the last point there, I feel that should be before developing the detailed design, because to me, whenever you talk about developing detailed design, that's spending a lot of money.
Yeah, I think we'll actually switch out what's in the original recommendation once we've sort of landed on.
No, good, thank you.
Councillor Brown.
Can I just get clarification from staff, sort of around Maxine's point, that doing this feasibility study, which does this review, is the natural next step that we were already planning on undertaking? Is that correct?
Through the chair, yes, that's correct. It's fair to say that the process has been a little bit stop-start over the last year or so, and the feasibility study did get underway a few months ago, or 6 or 7 months ago, but had been held up. We do have a draft feasibility study that does include a section on what other facilities are available within the area and a little bit about how this proposal is different from those facilities. That unfortunately has not come to you officially, and ideally that would come to you prior to a decision like this. However, I think there is sufficient time, 2 years, to ensure that we address some of the concerns that have been raised by submitters, and working in partnership not only on the detailed design but the operating model as well, was certainly intended to be the next step of the process.
Thank you. Councillor Price.
Just as I mentioned before, on the second point, it's additional extensive consultation process before embarking on a detailed design option. We need a little bit of an out on that. So what if the consultation shows something completely different that says you go on with it?
So yeah, what we're going to reword that original recommendation.
Bring it into it.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're getting there.
You know what I was meaning, eh?
Yeah.
But even that second red bullet point is saying the same thing.
That's what I was referring to, the red bullet, the second one.
So what would you like the wording to be, Councillor Price?
You're pretty good with words.
I'm going to let everybody have a turn.
There needs to be something in that.
Do you have some wording, Councillor Taylor?
We could just put in there the consultation process with all stakeholders before determining that we embark on.
Perfect. Yeah. Councillor Brown.
I don't know if this is allowed because it hasn't come to us yet, but if we have a draft feasibility study that already looks at the other facilities, is there some indication that we could get whether there is a need that's currently unmet or not yet? Is that something I can ask?
Through the chair. So the feasibility study, the draft feasibility study at this stage establishes the need for the community centre and also distinguishes it from a marae facility and a sports facility, in that those two facilities in particular offer a very different approach, a structured, timed offer of activities, for example. And that what is proposed through the community centre is unique in comparison to those two facilities. Also, though, does emphasise the need to make sure that as the project was to progress, that duplication of those activities was avoided through consultation and working in partnership with those organisations. So I think unfortunately the feasibility study has not come to you, and that some of those concerns could be allayed by progressing with that.
A supplementary question, please, Natasha. So I understood what you're saying around how the feasibility study will help identify each of those facilities and their role. But we also heard through submissions today, particularly from the Marae Nui community, that there are some facilities that are publicly owned that are, in their assessment, way behind on some of their maintenance. They talked about the toilet block, for example, which we know is an ongoing concern, has been brought to council beforehand. So will the feasibility study help to identify those other areas within the community that may need to be targeted for investment?
Through the chair, the feasibility study is definitely focused on this proposal. However, my understanding is that the Marae Nui Sports Club would be part of a reserve management plan, which is due to be undertaken in the next 12 months or so. So those sorts of issues would be identified through that process, and council would have the opportunity to make investments if it felt that it was necessary.
Fantastic, thank you.
We're just putting some extra words in here, but Councillor Crown.
Thank you, through you, Madam Mayor. I think that in order for us to, consider these things as robustly as possible, widening our lens on it, thank you, Councillor Wright, to consider the other opportunities that might be there, that just makes sense. But that also brings me back to my understanding of Te Pihinga Ake and what the community centre is sort of designed to do, which is to activate and revitalise a community that is very much in need of it. So I'm just looking for, to me, the community centre is part of the jigsaw, as are the other facilities. But just looking at it from purely the money sense and process sense, I feel like we're missing another lens, and that is a community that desperately needs to be partnered with, and some investment in order to fulfil our responsibilities across all four wellbeings.
Thank you, Councillor Crown, and I agree with you completely. I think that we are still doing that, and really the changes that we're making here is the due diligence just around ensuring that we're capturing the whole picture for this community. And yeah,
I guess then my question actually is to the staff, is that the intention of the community centre? Is that what we're hoping it will create, and the outcomes that we're looking for in association with it?
Through the Mayor, yes it is, in terms of providing a different offer than what is already available. We've heard over a number of years from the community that there are some serious social issues and economic disadvantages that they face that they would like support with. The response from the community and council has been to focus in on a community centre, and that has been in conjunction with others who can provide other solutions such as housing from kāinga ora perspective, and other partners who have other ideas as well. And we have also provided a lot of support over the years around community-led initiatives that have also started to have an impact in the community. So there's a lot of positive things happening in the community, and this is a way of enabling a space for that to continue and to develop along with the developing community. One of the key things about the facility is that it is flexible and is able to change with the future needs of the community. I hope that answers your question, Councillor Crown.
Deputy Mayor Brosnan.
Just a very small point, and I think it was raised by Councillor Crown as well. Could we change the way that we refer to this project, giving it its full name, Te Pihinga Ake?
We can. I would be, keen to hear council officers' thoughts. I mean, I've never heard it referred to as Te Pihinga Ake.
No, neither.
And I think that's something that would need to be considered, whether we need to make a decision on that today or simply include that as part of the ongoing consultation and feasibility study. And
yeah, more just a note for perhaps the way that we refer to the project. If we have shortened it unilaterally, then we should. Yeah.
Which we need to confirm. That.
I'm not sure if Natasha's in a position to be able to comment on.
She was, yeah.
Sorry, if you could repeat that.
Te Pihinga Ake, have we unilaterally decided to shorten that name, and should we refer to it with its full gifted name?
Through the Chair, I do need to go back and review that process. My understanding was that it was Te Pihinga. So I can go back to Matua Tiwana and clarify that.
Sounds great, thank you.
Through you, Madam Mayor, just to a point that was made previously about risk of the purchase of the land, for example, I just want to make the point that the extra steps for want of a better word, may increase that risk potentially of the land sale not being able to be finalised, in the spirit that the sale of the land was for the community centre. And while I don't have the ability to get further information on that now, I just wanted to put it out there that the bullet points that are up there look a little bit less committed than the bullet points that were up there before. Kia ora.
Thank you. Councillor Brown, followed by Councillor Tapani.
This might be an easy suggestion or idea to shoot down then, because I think it's going even less committed, but I was just wondering whether it's an option, because being on the board of the Pukimoki Marae, I know it runs on the smell of an absolute oily rag, and I was wondering whether we could budget to invest the money in the community and leave that open as to where it falls.
Through you, Madam Mayor, it may just be, in my opinion, moving quite far away from what we've asked the community to consult on. And although there is some great direction here for us to really firm up this investment and ensure that it is hitting the mark, we need to be conscious of the fact that 73% of people were supportive of Te Pihinga taking form, and it was a matter of whether it was now or in a few years to allow for the further consultation.
Thank you, Your Worship, through you. So I just want to, one, reiterate the value of what $11.5 million might return to that community, and two, seek either an opportunity to talk with our staff or an answer today around MP Stuart Nash's submission around banning patches in council-operated and owned facilities, and how we will find a balance in that space. But coming back to the $11.5 million investment, what I wanted to express was that if we have a look at our motels across our region, actually across the country, we can see that when we are forced to compound or to isolate, or not isolate, but to concentrate a portion of our community that are at the bottom of the bucket, as such, low incomes, high needs, health issues. The hotels are a insight into some of the challenges that come with communities that have a higher proportion of need. With those communities come more needed health services, policing, wellbeing, and a whole lot of added features to try and provide stability and wellbeing for everybody in that community. Marae Nui is one amongst many suburbs nationally, and one like Flaxmere in our neighbourhood in Hastings, which shows that without considered social investment in the well-being of a community and its facilities to provide for those even basic needs, such as having a space to meet that is void of judgment or rules, enables people to be able to talk openly and create local and community solutions to address their challenges and issues. In my short 10 years of working in Marae Nui, that has been one of the comments that has been consistent from the community, is that we need a space for us to be able to deal with our issues, to build solutions that we can drive. And there are a number of services and providers in Marae Nui that are working to that end. My reservation around where we were heading was I would love to see, as Councillor Wright and Councillor Crown have indicated, a strong collaboration amongst all of those parties within that community to build better solutions at a local level. And I do agree that there has been a long-standing request from this community to provide for its specific needs. It is a community of interest, as our representation review showed. They have specific concerns and specific demands, and they need a tailored and catered solution in order to find their way out of some of those situations. And so I wanted to put on the table in front of our team, because I understand while we got good 75%, let's do this, and there's a good strong call from the community that we need that help, just the sort of sense of apprehension around how this might roll forward. I wanted to take that opportunity to reiterate what $11.5 million might represent to the well-being, safety and vibrancy of that community and by extension our city. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tapani. And I guess just to add to that, when you refer to our Council Pulse dashboard, I think it really does highlight in terms of the socio-economic outcomes that we are needing to achieve in this community. It is currently ranked, and this isn't exact, but it's approximate, about 1,850 on the scale out of 1,860 suburbs throughout the country. So we know it has very, very high social needs, and that every dollar we invest in the community will work towards better outcomes for them. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Your Worship. We've had a little bit of discussion around percentages of people and whether they support or not. And I just draw people's attention to the fact that respondents' opinions varied by area, but Maraenui residents were overall more likely to support this project. 42.9% do it now, but a higher percentage of 54% saying do it later. So unfortunately, we don't know why they would like to do it later, but is it do it later because we need to discuss this and consult more? And so that's where I think, although the Chief Executive is indicating that we're not being quite as positive, we are still being positive, but I think we're being diligent and looking at all the options.
I agree, and I think the sticking point at the moment is this wording indicates that potentially we won't proceed, whereas we consulted on this either happening now or happening later. And I agree absolutely. The submissions that came through about doing it later, I think, was because there was a request and a desire for further consultation. And I would actually like to propose that we don't have the wording in here around before determining, because we have actually consulted on this project proceeding. And I think now it's more around doing the additional due diligence before proceeding to the detailed design stage. Councillor Simpson?
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair. Look, I think it's all very rosy to talk about the 72 people, 72.8% that responded positively, but amongst many of those that said start it later, their detailed description was actually quite apprehensive about the proposal. And further that today, two of what I would call some of our key stakeholders said don't do it. And I think it's really essential that we sit down and figure out why they're saying don't do it, to figure out whether there's a mismatch in what we're communicating or what our aspirations are. And I think there's at the moment, there's an impasse, it appears, around this. The people that we're perceiving we're wanting to contribute to, some of the key stakeholders in that environment are saying, don't do this. I think we have to be very mindful of that. Even though we might see that as a minority, I think we have to be very mindful that they are strong players in that environment. And I think we have to be very careful about how we proceed to ensure that we do grow a robust relationship around that.
Councillor Bogan, then Councillor Crown.
Could I just correct something, because the Maraenui Rugby and Sports Association said do it later, if that's one of the two parties you're talking about.
No.
I think you're talking about Taiwhenua and Rupu, which it wasn't actually, it was Maureen Moore doing a personal submission.
Yeah.
Councillor Crown.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I agree with Councillor Simpson, and I also think that the resolution that we are crafting at the moment will allow for that to happen. I absolutely agree that the comments that we had, especially in person, led us to all be on the same page that there is an issue or a perceived issue with the engagement. It was mentioned to us that this whole thing started in 2013. We're 7 years down the track. That does a lot to people's goodwill and enthusiasm as a project develops. So we actually have an opportunity now to to give some validity to a partnership and to work on building really robust relationships with those key stakeholders. So I see that the resolution that we are putting together will take care of that. However, I still feel like we are tracking as positively as possible while still being as robust as possible.
Councillor McGrath, then Councillor Crystal.
Just a question to the team, I guess. $11.5 million. Can anyone tell me how many workshops we had on this? Is it a known? Because I know when we talked pools, we were able to present how many workshops council had. From my knowledge, did we have one workshop with full council? Two? Because my recollection is only one. And we're sitting here because I don't think anyone has any idea. We think that the bricks and mortar is the answer, but I'm just wondering if $11.5 million worth of programs is better than bricks and mortar. As a council, I don't actually think we're in a great position to even be doing bricks and mortar, because if I look around our city, I don't think there's one council building that's not struggling with maintenance or maintaining it, or it's just that needs work. I don't think our council's quite ready to build another building, although this does give us a couple of years. But I think we just need to do a lot more work to work out what we're trying to fix and what we're trying to achieve.
So just in direct response to that, it's not just the internal workshops that we need to consider here. I've been involved in a number of external workshops and activities with the community on this project, and putting it into perspective with also the Ahuriri Regional Park, where there's been a combination of one or two internal workshops and a number of external workshops. So I think you just need to be a little bit careful when you're referring to it as in terms of the number of internal workshops that we've had, and particularly since it's been from such a long time ago, and we may not have actually been around for some of the initial conversations around this particular project. So, yeah. Councillor Crystal.
I've been listening to the korero around the table, and I think to sum it up, we need to get the right people in the waka and all start paddling in the right direction, because at the moment it seems as paddling going different directions, and I think it's really important to get everyone, the right people there to discuss and work out in which direction that this project is best for the Maraenui community.
So if we can just take a moment to actually review what we have before us. The only comment I would make is just bearing in mind whether there is a potential risk to the purchase of the land with the current wording, to just bear that in mind. But if people are on the whole happy with the wording as it is now, then that is what we'll put forward as the recommendation. Councillor Brown.
I think if we take out the determining if, so if we had, in the second point, sorry, so with all stakeholders before council embarks on detailed design, that that leaves us open to, if the need is significantly smaller than we've originally thought, then it allows us to do a detailed design of something quite small, but and it gives more surety for the purchase of the land that something will be built.
I also don't know that we need the word additional and extensive.
It's quite a, yeah.
I think just take out extensive, yeah.
Mm.
I don't think we. Yeah, and we don't. I don't think we need. Oh well, it's pending that. Pending, yeah. Okay.
Do we need that second?
It is a bit of a double up, but I think just for making it very clear, we can leave it in there. Councillor Crown.
Given the situation with the potential purchase of the land, are we able to just put some urgency into that second point, maybe as soon as possible, or I don't know, something around timing, just so that that there's a sense of urgency attached to it. So to engage in an additional consultation process as soon as possible with all stakeholders before council embarks on detailed design options, etc.
Through you, Madam Mayor, that the purchase of the land is now in a process. And so I believe that, as Natasha was saying before, it is likely to happen imminently, and therefore the engaging additional consultation with urgency might not meet the needs of the people that we're consulting with. So I think at the moment, the way that that second bullet point is worded is very much about understanding the needs of the people and engaging people in the process. But to be clear, the purchase of the land is imminent, so council may wish to consider that as well with respect to having the land in advance of this work being undertaken.
Also noting that this current recommendation is actually still in line with our original timelines, yeah.
Yep.
Okay, well, Deputy Mayor Brosnan?
Just a question, are there any gateways or decision points of council in that?
It was a question that I was going to put back to people around the table as well, in the sense of, is it a matter of noting the gateways for this to proceed, just as we discussed with the Ahuriri Regional Park?
And I guess the third point does essentially highlight that we would not be moving forward until receipt of the feasibility study and, the additional consultation confirming the need being undertaken, but we could reword that to make it.
Yes. Decision points.
Suggesting.
Yeah, I think just noting those two decision gateways would be helpful. As the Chief Executive mentioned, I think that's a good way to give certainty to the discussion. Of the
Through you, Madam Chair,
consultation and feasibility.
wouldn't each of those first two steps, wouldn't we be making a decision at the end of each of those first two steps? So aren't those the gateways?
Well, no, build them in,
That's
but-
what I said, but the
Yep.
Deputy Mayor was suggesting that we
Build them
needed some
in.
additional wording around that.
Or-
Put it as number 2, and then you've described the 2 gateways. That sentence.
Sorry, putting it where?
If you just put that sentence as point number 2, and then you describe the 2 gateways underneath.
We've already got, so, we've got, oh, are you meaning after the,
After the first point, add that sentence, note the 2 decision gateways.
I think I would see it as the third bullet point.
You know what I mean, eh? If council's happy that it's inherent in 2 and 3, that's fine. I was just.
Feasibility study first.
Yeah. Sorry, Anna.
Yeah, feasibility first. Well done.
Under the pump.
Well done, everyone.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So I am happy to move from the chair if we have a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Taylor. I think you know, based on the conversation and debate we've just had, we're all very much on the same page with this, and it is just around actually ensuring that we're doing the due diligence required before we move forward to the next step. So thank you everybody for putting your thoughts forward. Councillor Taylor, did you wish to speak to the motion?
I'd only just add that actually the officer's recommendation, where option 2 of do it later, actually says this enables sufficient time for participation from mana whenua, key stakeholders in the community, and I think we've just basically confirmed that.
We have. I will just open it up in case anyone else would like to speak to the motion before I put it. No, so I put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried.
Cool.
Thank you, everyone. Right, back to Ahariri Regional Park. Toilet break. We'll have a quick 5-minute break.